Hello everybody. I will discuss geochemical and mineralogical signatures of ICG deposits in the Mount Isa province. The main motivation of the research discussed here was to identify signatures of copper-gold mineralization and alteration across various deposits in the region, and to provide an extensive, internally consistent geochemical dataset based on industry standard techniques, a baseline which could directly assist exploration for ICG deposits. Overall, we have collected and analyzed approximately 900 samples, including 230 mineralized samples with more than 0.2% copper, using the same methods, a combination of digestion and analytical techniques for nearly complete geochemical characterization of samples. And the sample deposits shown on the map. They include Ernest Henry, Eloise, Swan, Osborne, and Little Lever. Together, these 5 deposits cover most of the known geographic extent of the ICG mineral system and most of the geochemical diversity of ICG deposits in the region. Shown here is an example of sample distribution from one of the most extensively sampled and studied deposits in their camps in the region, Ernest Henry. Approximately 200 samples were collected and analyzed, mostly from within the deposit itself, but also extending way beyond the easily identifiable footprints of the deposits, covering the distance of over 4 kilometers. An overall composite geochemical signature can be assessed by multivariate of statistical analysis of the data. For example, principal component analysis, identifying the most significant vectors of variability in the dataset. The overall signature of ICG deposits in the region is characterized by covering copper, gold, silver, sulfur, tellurium, selenium, indium, cobalt, and bismuth. An additional secondary signature also includes uranium, tungsten, molybdenum, light rare earths, and several other elements such as arsenic, barium, and fluorine. A more intuitive way to illustrate an overall geochemical signature of copper mineralization can be by displaying relative elemental enrichment of mineralization against average crustal abundances, shown here for the trace elements in the descending order of an overall relative enrichment. For simplicity, displayed here are only the means and much more stable medians for ore samples with more than 0.2% copper. Again, similar to results of the principal component analysis, on average there is commonly strong overall enrichment in tellurium, selenium, gold, silver, bismuth, and copper, and variable enrichment in several other elements. Of course, an overall signature is an abstract concept, ignoring differences between individual deposits, which are crucially important. So let's have a look at signatures of individual significant deposits, starting from Ernest Henry. The signature is quite complex, with many elements strongly anomalous, which is a key feature of the Ernest Henry signature. The elements in brackets, uranium, rare earths, fluorine, are not strongly enriched but are quite symptomatic for this deposit. Now let's compare the geochemical signature of Ernest Henry with that for 4 other significant ICG deposits in the region. We can see overall similarities in the broad enrichment pattern. For example, all deposits are mostly enriched in tellurium, selenium, gold, silver, but there are also significant systematic differences. Well, the most distinctive is the polymetallic signature of Ernest Henry. The other 4 examples shown here are more similar to each other than to Ernest Henry, but we can also see systematic differences within that group as well. For example, bismuth is clearly part of the signature for Eloise and Osborne, but not for Swan and Little Eva. Or light rare earths, significantly enriched in Swan but depleted, effectively diluted by mineralization in the other 3 deposits. The presence of distinct geochemical variants of ICG deposits can be illustrated in different ways, including clustering analysis. We can define 3 broad geochemical groups, each with its distinct dominant signature. Particularly distinctive is the complex polymetallic signature shown in red, dominant for Ernest Henry and nearby E1 deposits. A second group has a generally much simpler signature, typical for most of the other larger deposits in the region. And the third one, characterized by relatively strong silver, bismuth, cobalt, indium, and sometimes also arsenic and nickel, is less common, observed in several smaller but high-grade deposits or their parts. Now very briefly about alteration mineralogy and geochemistry of major elements in ore and proximal alteration. There are 2 broad mineralogical groups The first one is characterized by abundant potassic feldspar and magnetite, 3 photos on the left, and the other one by the absence of any significant K-spar alteration, commonly abundant carbonates, biotite, actinolite, and variable amounts of magnetite to the extent of its complete absence. The second group also includes essentially carbonate veins with chalcopyrite and pyrite. There are many more deposits in the Cloncurry district without proximal K-spar alteration, group 2, than those with it. The distinction between these two mineralogical groups is fundamental, including metallogenic implications, but it is of course very broad, and there are finer variations within each group, particularly in group 2, which can be further investigated geochemically. This rather complex discrimination diagram illustrates that ICG mineralization in the Cloncurry district is represented by diverse alteration types, or facies. The discrimination parameters and alteration facies used here were proposed in 2013 by Jean-François Montreuil, Louis Corriveau, and Eric Gransky, based on the Canadian data. A very quick summary of results: samples of copper mineralization across ICG deposits in the Cloncurry region cover almost the entire spectrum of alteration types commonly associated with ICG mineral systems elsewhere, but with some exceptions. Different deposits have different dominant proximal alteration types, but often display trends across several alteration phases. By far the most common is calcic ferric metasomatism with relatively little potassium, the broad group 2 from the previous slide, with the notable exception of Ernest Henry, the main example of group 1, with mostly high iron potassium metasomatism. So this is a summary only for mineralized samples. More information about overall expressions of the mineral system can be obtained from a more complete dataset, including samples from outside copper ore zones. Displayed here is the data for Ernest Henry, Swan, Little Eva, and Osborne, and symbol sizes are classed by copper content. The largest size represents high or grade copper. This image paints a more complete picture of the probable progressive nature of metasomatic reactions and their expressions on a deposit to Kemp scale for the selected deposits. This, for example, suggests an evolutionary trend for Ernest Henry and confirms the distinctive nature of Ernest Henry compared to the other deposits in the region. This diagram further illustrates that majority of copper mineralization and strong alteration in other deposits is of the low to moderate potassium, ferric calcic to sodic calcic facies. And this is all I have time to discuss today on this subject, unfortunately. In summary, ICG deposits in the Mount Isa province have consistent but diverse geochemical signatures and mineral alteration footprints. Deposits with dominant complex polymetallic signature and proximal potassic feldspar magnetite alteration are rare in the region, but include notable examples like Ernest Henry. Most ICG deposits in the region have simple geochemical signatures and low to moderate potassium alteration footprints, indicative of sodium, calcium, iron to iron, calcium plus or minus potassium metasomatism. And if you're interested to hear more about alteration footprints associated with the Ernest Henry deposits, please attend to our dedicated talk presented by my colleague Courtney Dinaram in the session on applications of spectral geology. And finally, I want to acknowledge our key collaborators and industry supporters of this project: CSIRO Minerals, for access to samples from an earlier GSQ funded project and ongoing collaboration. Our collaborators, CSIRO, Codes, UQ, NU, undertaking complementary work often on the same samples, which will greatly extend our understanding of footprints of ICG mineral systems in the region, and all companies for donating drill core and allowing access to samples and data, particularly Glencore, Chinola, Copper Mountain, FMI Investment, and Hammer Metals. Thank you.